Well, I felt it would be out about a year or a year and a half ago. So, you know, these things, I guess, tend to take longer than you think. But I do think that this, you know, the November ballot, you know, this initiative in California is an issue whose time has come. The time is here. It's there. You know, as I argue in my book, I think we have three very powerful trajectories, policy trajectories, that are historically converging right now. The first one, as we all know, is the medical cannabis movement, which began really in California with the 1996 law. And I'm not sure which was the most recent. Was it New Jersey most recently? But it went through Michigan in 2008, and what are there now, 14 states that, you know, and another dozen or so that are working on it?
Right.
So that movement has built a good deal of momentum. In addition, the problems with the drug war itself as a public health problem have received increasing attention, especially with the problems that have been happening in Mexico. The reporters that have reported on numerous deaths, the violence, you know, and it's not just a problem that's limited to Mexico, but that's just the one that's just the area that's closest to us. I think that the drug war has become a public health problem in its own right, and I think arguably it's a public health problem far greater than drug abuse itself. And you know, I'm not the first person to say that. There's many others who've said that. And I think so the second policy trajectory is the imperative of doing something about the drug war as a public health problem. That's the second trajectory. And the third would be the economic realities that we face, and the fact that there is a very high demand for herbal cannabis in the United States. So why not manage it as a commodity that can be, the value of which can be realized rather than suppressed, with the result that we just create more expenses and more problems for ourselves. So I see the three, you know, the three trajectories as converging, and I think that this November, I would expect a lot of people, if they don't realize it already, to realize that there's not a lot of reason not to move ahead with a regulate and control and tax approach to the management of cannabis, or to what I would call cannabinomics.
Thank you. Now, in addition to the luminous scientific data, I was amazed at the bibliography in your book. But in addition to the voluminous scientific data, I have enjoyed personally the many personal stories of the cannabis patients that you have illustrated in your book. Now, did you have any particular stories that maybe you didn't have a chance to get in the book, or something that you might want to highlight right now?
You know, one case comes to mind. A man that I treated in Illinois, a man who suffered from adult attention deficit disorder and also depression throughout you know, much of his life, but very smart, very bright individual who is actually a faculty member, teaches at a university in the area of psychology. And when I met him, he was working on postdoctoral research, and he was being treated for depression at that time, felt that he had attention and concentration problems, and was wanting me to evaluate him for treatment for ADHD. That was one thing that he asked about. The second thing was that he had been using herbal cannabis, had been smoking a little marijuana in the evenings because he found that it helped him to relax, and it helped him to focus on composing music, which was kind of his hobby, but it's also an area that he has a scientific interest in, because he's interested in using music learning and music composition to work with kids that have developmental problems. So he would sometimes have a little cannabis in the evening to help him. He found that it sort of enabled him to be more productive with his music, but it was causing problems in the family because his wife felt uncomfortable with it. They had one small child and another one on the way, and so he came to me to ask, one, well, did I think that it made sense that he was getting some therapeutic benefit from it, and two, did I have any suggestions as to alternatives, or some way that he might deal with the issue of his wife being unhappy about his smoking marijuana. And he wouldn't use it all day long. He would use a little bit in the evening. What I ended up doing in treating him is I actually substituted for herbal cannabis. I substituted prescription dronabinol or Marinol. It's basically prescription THC. For me to do that was an off-label use, which the patient fully understood. In the United States, that medicine is approved by the FDA for use as an anti-nausea medicine, and it's also approved for use in wasting syndromes, such as AIDS wasting syndrome, to stimulate appetite. But in his case, we were basically using it as an anti-anxiety agent. And he found that it was so effective, and again, his story doesn't universalize to everyone. Not everyone will have this same experience. But in his case, he felt that it was so effective that he literally, in the next 9 or 10 months, used marijuana maybe 2 or 3 times. He was using it nightly, and once he discovered prescription THC, he used marijuana not at all. And he had no inclination whatsoever to abuse the THC. He took it exactly as prescribed. And in fact, I started him on 10 milligrams early in the evening, and he actually reduced his own dose down to as low as 2.5 and then came back up to 5 and pretty much stayed there. So there really was not an abuse issue. But what was interesting about that case is he later moved out of the country to Canada, was in Vancouver, where he discovered that in one of the dispensaries there, they actually had capsules very much like the THC or the prescription Marinol capsules that we have here in the United States, but they were in fact whole herbal cannabis extracts, the sort of thing that you can find in dispensaries in California and other states where they've implemented medical marijuana laws. In other words, the capsules contained an oil in which was embedded a whole herbal cannabis extract. The difference between that and THC is the THC just has the one isolated compound, the THC, whereas the whole herbal cannabis extract has the whole array of cannabinoid compounds, which include something called CBD or cannabidiol, include a number of others. Cannabichromine is one. There's a number of different ones. There's some 70 or more different cannabinoid compounds. And so these capsules had something that was more representative of the natural array of compounds that you get in herbal cannabis. And so he began to use those for the same purpose. And he didn't find, he actually said those were probably the best thing for what he was looking for the kind of reduction in anxiety and at the same time facilitating focus that allowed him to work on his music in the evening. So while he was in Canada, he switched to access to using those kinds of medications. And you know, one of the things that I was asked to do by the folks there in Canada was to just complete a form indicating whether I supported or recommended his use, whether I was neutral on it, or whether, you know, I was against it. And basically what I said was, you know, he has said that it's helpful for him. Based on my knowledge, I don't see that it's harming him, and therefore I don't oppose, you know, his using it. And that's actually the closest that I've come to doing the kind of recommendation that's typically done for the medical cannabis patients in the medical marijuana states. Because as you know, Illinois has not yet passed a law or not yet implemented a law that would allow clinicians to do that kind of work. And again, much of my work has been done, you know, in administration, and my interest in this has evolved more out of the public health interest. But I certainly do support the efforts of patients and their doctors to get access